Perfect. So we're officially recording. Welcome, everybody. I see a few of you are still trickling in, which is absolutely fine. Welcome. Thank you so much for spending your evening with us. My name is Catherine Connors. I am one of the provincial parent liaisons, regional parent liaisons with Adopt4Life, and I'm here with Judith, who you all know from our webinar. So just before we get started, I'm going to go over some of the more housekeeping rules that we have about using Zoom and how to ask questions, that kind of stuff. And then we can kind of get into it. So the most important things, I think I've said it a few times, but in case you are newer, we cannot see or hear you. So you don't need to worry about where you are, what you're wearing. That being said, we're hoping that this is going to be an interactive webinar. So comments, questions, anything that you want to add to the webinar is going to obviously enhance it. We want to make sure that you get what you want out of this webinar. So that being said, how do you ask questions and how do you comment? So you'll see that on the bottom of your screen is a chat button. You're able to ask questions and make comments there. We also have another button called Q&A, and that's where you can ask very specific questions. So if you have a question for Judith about what she's talking about, if you have a specific question about your family, feel free to post in either one of those channels. As we go along, I will be monitoring both of them, so you don't need to worry about how you ask your question. As long as it's out there, I'll get it. If you are not comfortable sharing your name, so if you have a question and you want to remain anonymous, you have the option of doing that as well. So by doing that in the chat panel, you'll be able to address your chat question just to me or Judith. In that way, no one else can see the question. Or alternatively, in the Q&A box, you'll be able to actually ask a question anonymously to the rest of the group. No one else will be able to see, watching this webinar, since it's being recorded, no one else will be able to see the questions that you're being asked. We want to respect your confidentiality. That being said, people who are in the webinar live with us will be able to see your name and your question unless you want to do so anonymously. So I just want to make sure everybody understands how that works. This is a newer technology. Obviously, Wi-Fi and computers don't always run smoothly. So if this is the case, we do have a button that's called Raise Hand. So you'll be able to see that. I think it should be in your right-hand side. So if there are technology issues, or if you're finding that you can't hear Judith, or she's breaking up, or even you want her to repeat something, or she might be talking too fast or too slow, please hit the raise hand button, and that's going to notify us right away that there's an issue, and jump in and make sure that you guys are able to hear and see and all that kind of technological troubleshooting. So that being said, those are all the sort of housekeeping rules. Are there any questions about any of that before we start? I don't see anything. Amazing. Okay, so I've been doing my research on Judith. Well, I've known her for a little while now. There's a lot about you, so I hope that I do you justice, because
I'm sure you will.
So as you guys know from registering, she's a registered social worker, and she specializes in fostering and adoption. She's also a transracial, transcultural adoptee, and she co-facilitates an organization called the Adult Adoptee Network, which is just a tongue twister sometimes.
Yeah, just for fun.
And they just started doing their regular support groups, which I'm sure she'll talk a little bit more in this webinar. And she also is the star of a documentary called Adoption ID, and that's actually how I first met Judith. I was able to attend one of her screenings. And for all of you who are watching this, whether it's live or the recordings, her documentary is absolutely powerful. I've been in the adoption field, I've been an adoptive parent, and I've been in the field for some time now, and it was very raw. It really changed a lot of my perspectives as an adoptive mom. So I highly recommend you guys need to see this. And I'm not just saying that because she's right in front of me. You guys, it's a really powerful, so I really suggest for you guys, and hopefully you'll be able to tell everybody how they can watch it. Is that?
Yes, definitely.
Perfect. So that's how I first met Judith, and that's how we slowly got in contact. And then she graciously agreed to do this webinar because this is such a big topic for a lot of our families, and we want to make sure that this is a conversation that we're having, whether you are just starting your adoption journey, as I know some of you are awaiting parents, some of you are established parents for years. This is a topic that is something that goes throughout someone's entire life. So this is why this is very important. So thank you very much for coming. Again, because this is recorded, if you do need to leave for whatever reason, come back. It's absolutely fine, but we do want to make this as interactive as possible. That being said, I'm going to hand it over to Judith so she can start. And again, if you have questions, I'll be here as well to help, okay? So thank you. It's all yours, Judith.
All right. Well, good evening. Thank you so much, Catherine, for that lovely introduction. And I just want to say thank you to Julie and Catherine and the whole team at Adopt4Life for inviting me to come and speak with you all this evening. I understand we're right across Ontario. So hello to everybody, wherever you may be in Ontario this evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And I'm very honored to be here to be speaking with you about a topic that is indeed massive. So I start right off the bat by saying we will not be able to cover every element or every aspect of this topic tonight. It simply doesn't, the time simply doesn't allow for it. What I'm hoping to do this evening really is take you on a little bit of a journey with me through my personal and professional experiences of dealing with adoption and identity, and the extra layer that transracial adoption brings to this topic. As Catherine mentioned, I am a transracial, transnational, transcultural adoptee. I tick many, many boxes in this sort of adoption arena. A little bit more about me. I'm also, as Catherine also mentioned, I am a registered social worker. I actually practiced here, studied here in Canada, and then moved abroad to England, where I practiced for many years and have recently returned to Canada, and am back practicing here in Canada now, which is very exciting. I personally, on a personal side, I have actually 3 children. I have, well, I always pause slightly whenever I say my number of children. I have an older daughter who is my stepdaughter that I took on and parented her for the past 6 years. Been doing that. She's a teenager now, 16 years old. So have that expertise as well of parenting a child not biologically related to myself. And then I have 2 younger girls, 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. And I also have had the experience of losing through miscarriage 2 children as well. So I come at this with sort of many hats and many different angles, and I'm here as sort of with my multi hats on, sort of as my social worker self, as well as my adoptee self, and of course as a parent as well. So I look forward to sharing this journey with you this evening, and hopefully you will have some great takeaways. That's of course the hope, and I'll be able to share with you a little bit later on, as Catherine mentioned, where you can see my film. You can rent it or buy it online, and I also do screenings. I'm actually going to be up in Ottawa, so anybody who is in Ottawa, I will be in Ottawa in April doing a screening up there. So happy to provide you with some more detail about that as well towards the end. So for this evening, I've tried to make it as interactive as possible. Of course, in this facet as a webinar, we are somewhat limited with that. So do bear with me. Some of it may seem whoosh, lots of me talking, but hopefully, as we say throughout the questions, if you have a question, please feel free to pop it down there. And as I'm going along, we will acknowledge that, and I'll try and take my pauses and respond to some of those directly. I also, of course, at the end, hope to have some time available at the end to answer some more questions in greater detail. I don't pose or, assert myself as 100% expert in any areas. None of us can do. And therefore, if there are questions that perhaps would take on a more of a therapeutic manner, or that I feel like we would need more time to delve into properly, I'll let you know that, and I'll be happy to speak to you, at a later time. My contact details will be available to you, and I'd be happy to do that in greater detail. And just so we can hopefully try and get to some of the broader questions that hopefully will impact on the larger group. So I think that's all of the sort of my little housekeeping bits I wanted to just mention up front. And I just wanted to sort of take a very brief look, and I say brief because, as I say, this is a very big topic, and it was actually a challenge to sort of narrow down what do I want to say today to you folks. And I wanted to just start by taking a little bit of a look at our friend, who I'm sure many of you have heard of through your research or studying as you've gone on this adoption journey, the psychologist Erik Erikson, of course, and just his interest in child development and the different stages. So we're not going to go over all of the stages just because of time this evening, but I sort of wanted to focus on the ones that really will be impacting you the most as parents and the role that you're in at this current time, which I understand are probably younger children, sort of maybe teenage years. So we know that very brief synopsis, as I say, with Erik Erikson was that his theory basically is around assuming a crisis is going to occur during each of the stages of development. How a child learns to handle that and how they are managed through those crises depend on the outcome for them in later life. So if they are successful and able to go through each of these stages essentially unscathed, and we all have different levels of trauma, but without significant trauma in their life, they can come out and really conquer the world essentially. It doesn't mean they won't have challenges, but they'll be able to manage those challenges and feel like, okay, I can deal with this, I can manage this, and come out the other side positively. When they don't have that support, then that has a direct impact on their identity and how they are able to develop themselves. So I've just sort of tried to break it down a little bit, and we'll go into a little bit more detail. So the first one, of course, that starts is right from birth. So for many of you, of course, you may not have met your child right at birth. I appreciate some adoptees have happened right from birth, some are later on, some are older children. So, but regardless, if you're an adoptive parent, you have not had your child through the initial 9-month birthing period and through those first however many hours, days, weeks, months, etc. of their life. So that is the initial loss stage that adoptees go through. And this is transracial or non-transracial, of course, adoptees. And what are the first thing that a child looks for when they come into this world? They're looking around for, okay, who is going to take care of me? Who is my person in this world, or people? Who is my small sort of network of people that I can trust, that I can rely on, and who will be there for me to provide the stability and consistency that I need? And once they realize that, okay, these are my parents, these are the people who are going to be providing this for me, and they have that, they know that's who they look to provide that. However, for children, when they don't have that, what happens? They aren't able to build and develop that trusting relationship. And we know that affects their attachment greatly. And I understand you've recently had an attachment seminar, so I'm not going to delve into attachment, but it's a very sort of basic. If their needs aren't being met, they don't learn to trust. The circle of trust is essentially broken, and the child then is left really to their own devices, and they become more anxious, and that's when we see children who become chronically upset, crying a lot, etc. Those are some of the symptoms that you would see in a child who hasn't had their needs met in the way. So what are some of the things we do to minimize the trauma that these children have had in early life? It's by being very, very attentive to their needs. So when you have your adopted child and they come into your family, it's following that routine. And many times when we were doing a transfer, for example, of a child, we would say, please keep the routine for at least a period of time. We appreciate you're going to want to get into your own routine, but for the first few weeks at least, honor the routine that their foster parents have set up for them if they've come to you through that means. Because it's important for the child to have a certain amount of consistency with all that they're going through, as you can imagine. New home, new smells, new surroundings, new faces, new people they have to learn to trust. So if we can maintain certain similarities for them, that's all the better. Some of the things we would recommend is keeping the sheets that they're sleeping on and the same wash detergent, for example, or a cuddly toy that maybe they had that they were very comfortable and familiar with, things that they can rely on. And those are very small examples, but that will help to develop and build those relationships. As a child gets a little bit older, sort of 18 months to 3 years, so sort of that toddler age, they are becoming independent. And as I said at the beginning, I have a 3-year-old right now. She just turned 3 last weekend, and I can attest to this fully out. She is in independence mode. She is just, no, mommy, no, I got this. Her favorite word is no. We're expanding the vocabulary, thankfully, but she is very much wanting to learn how to do things on her own. She's getting that independence, and I actually love it. I love watching her do that and seeing her, you know, as she's learning to pull up her stockings and pull on her own pull up and pull it down and change her own clothes, and it's lovely to watch. And sometimes you do for speed because we all have very busy lives. We want to hurry them along, but it's amazing actually if you just pause for a moment during that time in the morning or in the evening when you're getting them ready or for school or getting them, you know, undressed for the evening, and let them do it and give them that extra moment. It's amazing what they can actually accomplish. And we have to remember as parents to just, okay, hold back. This is only going to take, well, it might take a few minutes longer than we want, but allow them that opportunity, because what it does for them is it builds up their self-esteem, their self-value, their self-worth, and they say, yes, I can do it. And it's great. Isn't it great, that look on their face when they're like, yes, I just did that. I accomplished that. The flip side of that, of course, is when they aren't encouraged, when, you know, and I'm not saying if you're in a hurry one day and you've discouraged your child, you've scarred them for life, don't take it to that extreme, of course. But for a child who's constantly put down and told they can't do it, or you can't do that, you're too little, or you know you're not doing that right, and always consistently over time put down in that way, what happens? Their self-esteem takes a nosedive. What other way could it go, right? Often too, we'll see children regress actually. And that's when we start to see some of that behavior actually scroll back and you're thinking, wait, I have a toddler here and they're acting more like, you know, baby behavior. So that's another thing that we see that does come. How can we help those children? So when a child comes to you at this stage and they've maybe gone through that period of time when they haven't had somebody lifting them up and supporting them as they're developing their independence, they need to know that they can rely on you. That's very important, of course. So they may be extra clingy, and that can sometimes be, you know, a little bit of a frustrating experience. But for a period of time, at least, they often need to have that and know, okay, I do have somebody I can trust. Again, going back to the trust, rely on, and somebody who's going to help me to develop these skills that I haven't learned. I haven't had the opportunity to learn them. They may also, though, be on the other side of that, in that they're large and in charge, and, you know, they know how to do everything on their own. And of course, that's not true either. So it's about really finding balance and creating opportunities for them to learn to trust you and to learn to trust themselves as well. So that's extremely important in that stage of development.
And we do have a question, sorry. Do you want me to wait till this is over?
No, please, go ahead.
So the question that came up is, we will need to stay in South Africa for 3 to 5 weeks with our child out of the baby house. What are your thoughts or advice about routine and transitioning into Canada, as there will be multiple large changes?
Yes, definitely. I mean, as soon as you add leaving the country and going abroad, you've just added a whole other level, definitely. I would say, and I know it's a little bit harder if they've come from institution type environment, and what you'll do in your home versus what they do in an institution is going to be very different. I would still say as much as possible. So for example, a lot of institutions actually do have very good routines. That's how they're able to manage and survive. Get that list from them. Find out, okay, when do they normally serve breakfast, lunch, dinner? Meal times are very important, of course. When does nap time usually happen? Try and keep that consistency as best that you can, especially while you're in South Africa and, you know, starting to take over the care of your child. The same though when you come back to Canada. Obviously there's going to be that time difference, but when you come back, if you can again keep on that routine, you know, in accordance with Canadian time zone, but the same type of routine. So, you know, if they wake up, have breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning in South Africa, do the same here. Obviously their body will take some time to adjust just naturally, as we all do when we go through time zone changes. But at least if they know I'm going to still have things happening in the same order, then that will create a sense of peace and calm for them. Because you're right, coming from another climate altogether, another country, hearing different languages, seeing different faces, it's going to be a huge shock to them. And that is a form of trauma on children. There's no two ways to look at it. And we need to support, you need to support your child the best way that you can in maintaining as much of their routine as possible and as much familiarity as possible as well. And that's a perfect time when I would say bring something from their baby home that they had, like a blankie, as I said earlier, a toy, something that is very familiar to them. Maybe it's even a picture. What did they look at their walls in the baby home? Is there something like that that you could replicate or get, just so that when they're coming into your home, they're not sort of surrounded by everything new. I would say that would be my best suggestion, sort of crossing the time zones and the different cultural as well. Great question, thank you. So looking then at that preschool age, which is about 3 to 5 years old, when your child is sort of just getting into that phase of exploring relationships with peers and learning how to make decisions more on their own. A lot of children now have gone on to nursery or preschool, starting kindergarten or JK. So they're away from you more. Their curiosity is wider, it's more broad. They're coming into contact with different types of people, and they're working on those skills and developing that. And they're also learning to understand that, oh, sometimes I can be annoying and people don't want to always ask, because it's the why phase, isn't it? Why that, mommy? Why that, daddy? Why? And sometimes we as parents are like, enough with the whys already, and we try and do those close-ended, comments. I've done it too. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent, because we also have to teach our children appropriate times, of course, to ask questions. And we need to give them boundaries. They need boundaries. They crave boundaries. So they do need that. We want to fulfill their thirst and their hunger for knowledge and information. And we can do that in so many different ways, pouring into their lives. But we have to be cognitive of, as well, of the fact that there have to be some parameters put in around that. So it's amazing when you see them sort of going through this phase of exploration. It's absolutely beautiful. What it does if they don't get that, so if they're always being put down and always being shoved into a corner or ignored, they just shrink more and more into themselves, and they won't be able to develop their relationships with their peers in a healthy manner, and they'll doubt and question themselves more. Again, in this way, how do we minimize the trauma then? It's again about consistency. And you'll probably hear me say this a lot, but consistency for children is so important and so essential. They need things that are predictable in their lives. They need to learn to regain the trust and the control, basically, that they've lost. So that goes right back to the trust again. If they haven't had that initial trust building relationship with an adult, they need to learn that. And that's why we see children often when they are, adopted children are coming to you at age, chronologically, they're 3 to 5, 6, 7, but they're actually emotionally and mentally, they could be farther behind because they haven't developed those skills yet. And as Erickson says, if they haven't developed them, that's having a massive impact on their lives and on their development. So we move then on to 5 to 12-year-olds. That sort of awkward stage for a lot of children where they're sort of now in school fully. So their time is being sucked up by education, teachers, friends, peers start to become more important. The time they spend away from you is much greater, obviously sort of 7-8 hours a day, they're usually away from you. And they're just exploring more around them. What does the world mean? Right from wrong, being fair and equal. And again, I have a 7-year-old, so I'm going through this now. And as I was reviewing for today, I thought, oh yeah, this is my 7-year-old to a T. It has to be, you gave her more than me. She got an extra slice of pizza, or she got one more, chip than I did. And I'm thinking, wow, you're comparing to a 3-year-old, first of all, so she's not getting as much as you, but everything's has to be very fair. So that's an interesting journey. So be careful as you're pouring out those corn pops or whatever it is that they're watching, and they're picking up on those cues as well. So this is a really interesting time. They're learning that they can do all sorts of new things, new skills are coming up, and it's amazing to see when you lift them up and you're able to say, I'm so proud of you for that. And they learn, I can be proud of myself. I've accomplished that new goal. I've just recently put my girls in gymnastics, for example, and you should have seen them before the class started. They were nervous, they were anxious. What if I don't like this? What do I do, mommy? And I said, you're going to try this. This is important that you try things. And we have to push our children into things that they don't always, they have that fear. They both loved it. They came out of those classes beaming, grinning from ear to ear. They had accomplished new things. They were telling me all the different things they'd done, all the new moves. And it was great because they felt proud of themselves because they had accomplished something. So again, what happens when a child doesn't get that encouragement? What if I wasn't there to praise them and heap that upon them? They doubt themselves, right? And that's when that worry and that doubt and that self-esteem again comes lower and lower and lower. You know, I think in this stage too, you also have children who are comparing themselves to each other, to their classmates, to their peers, to their siblings, if you have siblings within this age group. So it's very important as well that you find an area that your child does excel in. So I often compare this to if you have, for example, so I was one of 5 children. 2 of us are adopted and 3 were biological. So my siblings that are biological to my parents, there are certain traits that I see obviously within them. And, you know, they're very smart. They're very like academically smart. And I have other skill sets. But growing up, I was very aware of that. And that sort of, you know, they're into sci-fi, they're into these different things. And I needed to excel at something. I was good at ballet. I was good at gymnastics, you know. So those are some of the areas that I excelled in that, you know, my uncle said, oh, she has the most talent out of all the children. And that hearing that, I thought, oh, yay, that's me. You know, that was important, that I was comparing myself, but then I had a niche of my own. So it's extremely important to find your child's niche, whatever it may be. And sometimes it takes a little while to find, but definitely there will be something they can excel at. And in this zone, they are starting to understand more about their history and their past. So this is when you need to help them to understand it in as a child-friendly manner as possible without scaring them or traumatizing them more, but explain to them, not lying to your children. Sometimes, yes, we omit information because it's not age appropriate and it could do more harm than good at that particular age, but it's making sure you're giving them their story in as clear and straightforward a manner as possible so that they can learn, okay, to accept themselves and to be able then to manage their relationships going forward. So that's very important as well.
We do have another question that came in. And so this is just kind of going back from maybe your previous slides. So what about babies who are adopted right at birth? I've read that trauma can still occur even in newborn adoptions, and can you tell me your thoughts?
Yes, definitely it can. People always sort of said to me growing up, so I was adopted, I'll go into that in a second, when I was about 4 months, just under 4 months old. So people always think, oh, you're fine. You don't have any issues. You have no trauma then. You've gone through nothing. Huh? Really? Okay. That's one interesting thought that is simply not correct. Trauma happens from birth. You have been carried in your mother's womb for 9.5 months. You have bonded with that person. However good that attachment is or not, that is a connection, and an attachment has developed during that period of time. When that is severed, that has an impact. And we, at this stage in our life as adults, can't quite imagine. But I was a baby. I don't remember. I wasn't old enough to recall what happened exactly. In here, our brain development, there is a trauma when that happens. And regardless of what you hear, what people may say, it is trauma. And your baby will go through those signs in a different way. And it may manifest in a different way in them than it may in an older child, of course, because an older child often has had more loss over their life. So they've had, you know, more repeated offenses, I guess you could say, if you want to call it that. But for children, for babies, as young as they may be, there's still been a separation. And I think one thing that I always like to tell people is adoption is loss and gains. And we often gloss over the loss because we don't want to be sad. We don't want to think about what we've lost. But as much as you in your lives may have lost, you know, through miscarriage, stillbirth, not having the ability to conceive, lost other adoptions, whatever your losses may be, we've all experienced loss in life. And this is the first significant loss your child will suffer, is being separated from their birth family. It is simply not a natural occurrence to happen. And some people think, oh, but that's the reality. And I'm the type of person who, I'm here to be sort of the truth. I don't want to sugarcoat things because that's when things get dangerous and people think, okay, I don't have to worry about that because I did have a baby. And I'm not having a go at the person who asked the question at all, but it's just to be very, very clear. Trauma happens. Trauma happens in the womb, in utero, trauma happens. So an example of that is if there's domestic violence in a relationship, you know, and while a woman is pregnant, not that domestic violence only goes one way, and I appreciate that, but in this, giving this example, I'll say if a woman is being abused, that will have an impact on her child. We know this. You know, there are studies that have been done to show this. I knew of a case myself that I worked on in the UK when there was a child who, there was domestic violence in his parents' relationship, and when he came out, I'm not saying he came out kicking and screaming, but as time went on, he was still within a kinship arrangement, within family, being loved and nurtured. he was very aggressive. This child had an aggressiveness about him that was shocking to see at times. And it was scary because you thought, wow, the impact of what he heard, what he experienced, and what his mother had to defend off impacted on him. So it starts in utero. So when people say that, oh, I adopted my child as a baby, there's no impact. There's definitely an impact. So being aware of that is definitely the number one thing. And then how do you support your child? How can you help them? And it's acknowledging that loss with them as they get older, because it may come back up for them later in life. And they will also be able to reflect on, oh, wait, I'm with you, which is great. I have a loving family, but what did I lose to gain you? And that's where it starts to come into play for a baby who's experienced, adoption at such a young age. Hopefully that's answered some of that question. And then just the last stage that I wanted to sort of touch on briefly here was just in terms of course, the teenage years, a good old time when we all have experienced the angst and drama of being teenagers. What happens during this stage? During this stage, everybody is searching for themselves. Everybody is going through that phase of who am I? They're looking at themselves from, that sexuality side of their life and who am I becoming as a young person? I'm developing my body, my image, my all of that. Body image and all of that side is one side that's developing. And then it's also sort of the other side, the cognitive side of what am I going to do with my life? Where am I going to go? What's my future going to hold? There's so many questions that are coming at young people, especially today. We've all been there. We've all been through it. What I would say is at this stage, adoptees have so many extra layers. So I always look at it as layers. Adoptees, so everybody goes through identity, confusion, and where am I and who am I and going through all of that. Adoptees, another layer. Transracial adoptees, add on a couple more layers, because it's trying to figure out where do we fit? Which world do I fit in? And how do I fit in there? So this is a time when you're going to see lots of experimenting. We know that already. Teenagers experiment in positives and negative ways. And we need to let them experiment, of course, in a healthy manner with boundaries and parameters, of course. So it's really important that a child does feel supported during this stage. And I know it's hard. I've raised a teenager myself, so it's not always easy to support them in the manner you should be, because they can be stroppy and they can be rude and they can talk back and all the rest of it. But having that sense that they can come into their own is extremely important. When they don't have that, the loss and the feeling that they're going to have can be intensified even more. So how can we help support them during this phase? It's supporting them through all the emotions they're going to go through, everything from the crying fits to the angry, to the outbursts, to their self-esteem plummeting. We see everything, from cutting on some children to depression, to not feeling good enough, not being part of the cool clique, all of this varied waves of emotion. Can you imagine? I mean, we went through it, but it's sort of hard for us sometimes to reflect back and think about that time in our life. And then think of your child who's an adoptee, they're going through that extra layer of that. And a child who's not reflective of your culture and background, there's even more on top of that, because they're trying to figure out, wait, where do I fit in here? Which side of this world do I fit into? So we need to talk to our children. We need to talk to our teenagers and find positive ways that we can communicate with them, because in order to help them, we need to be connected with them and have them be part of the solution to providing them with the support that they need. So just moving on a little bit to talk about where do we develop our identities from? Like what makes us up? And I've just done a few little quick points, and this again is sort of a condensed version, but namely our family. That's a big way we all get our identities from. Where you even are in your family. Are you the oldest? Are you the youngest? Where do you position yourself there? Your medical and social history. And this is a big one for adoptees, of course, medical history. What does that mean? Are there things that are hereditary in your family? What is your makeup in that way? What about who you look like, who you resemble, who you might take after in your family? I grew up with that. Oh, so-and-so takes after grandpa. So-and-so takes after that person. Who did I take after in my family? It was mentioned earlier about the intercountry adoption, your country, your climate, the food that you eat, other cultural practices, your language, religions, different customs, your nationality, your race. You can see the list goes on, but these are all the things that make up our identities. So what happens when you don't have a lot of the things on that list? Adoptees. there's a phrase that's called genealogical, bewilderment, tongue twister there. And essentially that was coined as the lack of information about one's biological ancestors in history. And we're seeing a real upturn in this not being as big of a mystery as it once was with all of our DNA testing sites, which I will touch on a little bit more later. But that is a huge wave, and people are starting to cut out that bewilderment because they're able to access this information. And that for adoptees, I can tell you from personal experience, is massive. We've gone all these many years not knowing, having question marks and answers and blank slates. And now to have some of those slots filled in is absolutely incredible. So I just wanted to take a quick moment and show you a little clip, if I may, just to give you a little bit more insight into my own experience. So I'm just going to share, I think if I stop sharing that one, and I'm just going to share my other screen with you here, and just to be all geared up and ready to go here. It is a few minutes in length, but I just thought this would be a good way to give you a little bit of a synopsis on me. This is going to be a preview of the film that Catherine mentioned earlier, Adopted ID.
I don't know if we can hear it. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Let me see if my volume will allow. Sorry about that, folks. Let me see. I'm going to try and put up my volume. Tell me, of course, if you can't hear it, then I will just speak to it instead.
I can hear it very faintly. I don't know if other people can hear it. I can't hear it, yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, sorry.
No problem at all. As we say, technology is sometimes more on our side than other times. So what I'll do is I will include some notes. So I will include the link for people to watch later on. And I'll just share verbally instead about my sort of that stage of my life. Bear with me for a second while I go back to that. So I did have a couple of other small clips I was going to share with you as well. So for those, similarly, again, the information will be there for you, and you can, of course, watch that afterwards. So my apologies that didn't work out, but I'll just basically give you the synopsis of my journey in Haiti. So I was born in Haiti, which is in the Caribbean. Many people now know it because of the earthquake and the tornado, the earthquakes and the hurricanes that happened there. But Haiti is actually a beautiful part of the Caribbean. It's the other half of the Dominican Republic, which more people are familiar with as a tourist destination. So I was born near Cap-Haitien, Haiti, which is in the northern region. I have no idea when I was born. I have no idea what time I was born. I have no idea exactly where I was born, because I was found literally on the roadside, as the story goes, in a ditch, covered with bugs, naked. I was then taken from that ditch to the hospital, which is the top picture you'll see in the slide here. That is a hospital I got to go back when I went back to Haiti and actually see where I was cared for, which was amazing. And very, very significant, as you can imagine, for me to see sort of the first place I went to when I was found. So I've never been told who found me or exactly the circumstances, but I was cared for in the hospital for a few weeks. And then I was taken down to an orphanage in Port-au-Prince, and because I was deemed to be an abandoned baby, and I was put up for adoption. So I sort of look at it, and it goes back to the question that was asked earlier about the trauma that a baby suffers. So for me, within my first, I would say, couple of weeks of life, I suffered two losses. The first loss, of course, being that of my birth mother and my biological family, not knowing who they were, not being separated physically from them under whatever circumstances that may have been. That was a loss, of course, a significant one. Then being taken to the hospital and being cared for there for several weeks, I lost my my second set of caregivers, a second loss already in life. Then I went to an orphanage where I was cared for again for a further 3 months, and then I lost those caregivers. So you can see that already, by the time I was 4 months old, I'd had 3 significant losses in my life. I was adopted. I was about 3.5 months of age, and I was adopted to Canada from Haiti. My parents are white Canadians, and my father was a minister, Pentecostal minister, and he and my mother had 1 biological daughter already, and they adopted me, and they felt it was part of their Christian duty to adopt and help, children and elderly people. So they felt very called to do it for their own spiritual reasons and wanting to answer that call, essentially. So they also went on to have 2 more surprise babies, as we call them, my brother and sister, who were biological to my parents. And they also adopted again from Haiti. They adopted a little boy who at the time was 4 years old when he joined our family. So as you can see in the bottom picture there, our family was a multiracial family. You also see my brother-in-law, and in this picture, my 2 nieces. So this is many years ago, but it just shows sort of the makeup of our family. For me, what stands out being in a multiracial family was the fact that I do not remember a time in my life when I've not been questioned about who I am. How do you fit into this family? If you look at this picture, it's very easy to spot me and my brother, who was adopted, right away, immediately. And that is essentially what my life was like. I was questioned. I was probed, literally, by people throughout my childhood of, how on earth could you fit into this family? That can't be your mother, that can't be your sister, etc., etc. What is poignant to me about this is that my siblings didn't have to go through that. Although, yes, they were questioned as well, as who's that Black girl with you? And my sister would be like, that's my sister. And people would question that, but it came down on myself and my brother as well. But being the older one, it often came down to me as, who are those people? You are not part of this family. Being told that over and over and over, what do you think that does to a person? Just think about that for a second. You don't belong to this family. You can't be part of this. How do you fit in here? I can tell you, it starts to chip away, and you start to think, how do I fit into this family? And it's not anything my family said to me. They loved on me. They loved on my brother the same way as they loved on their biological children. But it was those outer external forces that continually, even innocent classmates asking me, how can that be your mom? Those questions start at such a young age, and being aware of that is really, really important. As I got a little bit older, and between the ages of, I would say, 2 and 4, we actually lived in America. So I was adopted to Canada, my father got a new job, and we moved down to Ohio, which in the northern states, people think, oh, it's not very racially segregated there. This was in the early 80s, and it was extremely segregated. We lived on the white side of town, and the Black family lived on the Black side of town. Being with my family, of course, I lived with them on the white side of town. And it's interesting because in the black and white pictures of the 80s, I'm there, bing, right, sticking out right in the center of that picture. So I wasn't exposed to a lot of people of color at all during that time. And the impact this had on me was massive. I became very self-loathing. I did not like what I saw in the mirror. I did not like my Black skin. I did not like my curly Afro hair. I wanted features to look like those who were around me. I wanted to resemble my family. I wanted to look like my 2 white sisters, who were beautiful and blonde and blue-eyed, and people always doted upon them. And I wanted to look like my mother, who doesn't want to little girl grow up and look like their mother. And I didn't. I was very aware of the difference, and toddlers are. This is when they start to notice the difference. They start to think, oh, right, I'm not the same as you. And because it was pointed out to me, I was even more aware of it. So I was hypersensitive to that. I would scratch literally at my skin, wanting to pick off my skin. That's how bad it got. My mother was beyond herself. She did not know exactly what to do. And as much as, she tried to integrate, it was very difficult at the time. For me, what helped? Moving back to Canada. Go Canada. That's not to say Canada is without its racism, and I don't sugarcoat that at all, because trust me, I experienced racism here in Canada, very much so. But coming back at the preschool age, so we returned to Canada when I was about 4 years old, it was a significant time in my life, because we moved in to downtown Toronto, we lived, and down the street, our neighbor down the street was a Black American woman. She had 2 little girls. One was my age, we were just a few months apart, and we became fast friends, like starting to play together every day. This is the last few weeks of summer, and the summer days on your porch playing and enjoying your time. And we just became the best of friends. We ended up going to the same school, and our mothers became very close as well. That saved my life. And I literally mean saved my identity crisis that I was going through. And my mother is forever grateful as well to our friend, because just being around that Black woman and her children gave me a sense of self that I'd never experienced before in my life. And I think about it, and I think back to the sort of 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old me, and I'm sad that I went through that. It is sad that I experienced that, and that I felt that much like I didn't even want to be in my own skin. So having that connection made the biggest difference you can ever imagine.
So sorry to interrupt. We do have a question. Is it okay to talk, or do you want me to wait till? Okay. This is just so powerful. I didn't want to cut in, but I also want to make sure that people's questions are being answered. So one parent says, oh, I'm an awaiting parent of a sibling group from CARE. And if we're not able to get a complete history from them, so unknown birth father, for example, would you recommend DNA testing to help fill in some of those gaps when they are fairly young, so we can incorporate it into their stories as they grow up?
Yeah, it's a great question. Definitely. I think now that we've got so much technology at our fingertips, it's an absolute shame not to use it. You know, you have to be, of course, cognitive that you may also stumble upon birth family. I don't know the nature of, you know, the adoption that you're going through exactly. So you need to be aware of that, but you can put yourself on those sites anonymously. So people don't have to know your name or see your picture. So you can find out the information that you need, and you can also close it so you don't share your information with other people, and maybe open that part of it when your child's, of course, older and ready to search, because the information will be there and it will come up with the matches for your children. But I think that's absolutely fantastic. Your child needs as much information as you can possibly give them, and finding out what makes them up is such an important part of that. And, you know, you can be so creative with it nowadays too. Create maps and life story books that just cover and span, you know, oh, your family originates from this part of the country or from this country here. So it's a beautiful way to provide information to your child without having all of the information. I mean, I would have loved to have that, what I have now, the information I've been able to find out. Definitely. So as I was saying, children pick up the difference at a very, very young age. You know, I look to the Clark doll experiment. It's from way back in the 30s, but many of you may have seen it. Again, there's a video clip on there, but it's been redone now over the years several times. And it's essentially when the experiment was done by Dr. Kenneth Clark and his wife, Mamie, and they asked Black children, who do you like better? Who do you choose? They had a Black baby doll and a white baby doll. The majority of children chose the white baby doll as being better. And that comes directly from the images that are surrounding us. And as I say, that experiment has been done over and over and over again. And just now, I think it was, they did it after President Obama was elected in America. And that's when they started to slightly see the balance of more Black children choosing the Black doll. But it took from 1939 to 2008 for them to start to see significant difference. And that's scary. That says very clearly to me that we are still picking up, and our children are still picking up all of the images that are around them. They're getting the subliminal messaging from cartoons, from TV shows, from other people, from students, from teachers. It is absolutely inundating them. And those are children who may have been raised in, you know, Black homes as well. So not just children who are transracially adopted that they did this experiment on. So it's children who were raised in a Black family and they still chose the white doll as being the better doll, the prettier doll. And that's a very powerful, powerful message. So what can we do? We have to be so aware of the messages that we're giving to our children, and we need to provide them with the positives, you know, the flip side of that, and seeing positive images and portrayals of themselves. I would say this was a time when I realized I was not being treated equally. I was very aware, of course, as I mentioned, of skin difference and color and the difference I was within my family. But I was also aware that I was being treated differently because of my skin color. My own grandparents, my maternal grandparents, they've both passed on now, but I was treated differently by them. They were opposed to my adoption from the beginning. They told my mother they would actually disown her if she proceeded with the adoption. And I felt that growing up. I was not always afforded the same opportunities as my sisters, or they'd be given more money, they'd be given more, nicer things, etc., etc. My mother was very distraught again about this and tried to work very hard to make things fair. But I could tell from their tone of voice, from their intonation. So be aware that your children are picking up on all of these cues around them. So your family, your friends, these are people you need to be extremely aware of. What are their messages they're giving to your children, subliminally and quietly, or more overtly? During this age, I also was called a nigger for the first time. This is when I first experienced overt racism. I remember where I was, I remember what the boy looks like, and I remember also what my mom did about it. This is when my best friend and I, with the Black mom, we were at school together. And I was called this, and I sort of looked at him like, I don't think that's very nice. I told my best friend, and when we got home from school, we told our mothers. And I tell you, I've never seen two women hop into a car and drive down to that school faster. They stormed into that school, and they made sure it was dealt with swiftly, and they made a pointed effort of doing it right there in that moment. That has always stuck with me. As much as hearing that hateful word has stuck with me, the response that my mother and my best friend's mother had also has stuck with me. And that is the difference. And that let me know that's not okay. And I shouldn't be tolerating that. Pardon me, a little bit of background noise. So at this stage, children are often keen to explore their difference and wanting to sort of find out more about who they are, and having those conversations and give them those opportunities is great. So what the question that was just asked is perfect. What can I give to my child if I don't know a lot? Where are they from? What parts of, if it's Africa, if it's India, whatever the country may be, let them know about their background, their history, their culture, as much as you can, because this is an age where they're often very open to that and they want to learn more. They're sort of thirsty for it. So it's a great time to begin developing that. And you should start from when they're as small as possible, as soon as you get them, So I really strongly recommend that during that stage. Just to move on a little bit, I'm just conscious of time. So just to get me to my preteen stage of life, we moved out to the suburbs when I was 8 years old. So I lost the relationship I was talking about with my best friend and her mom. And I know this had an absolutely serious impact on me, my self-esteem, and how I then moved in the world. I didn't have people who looked like me as close to me. We lived in Mississauga, so it was still a multicultural environment, but not as much so. And I didn't know how to navigate myself. I felt more sort of judged and viewed, and I felt very different. I didn't know exactly where I was fitting in. And as I said, that preteen stage, you're starting to go through that angst anyhow. But I went through it in an even bigger way because I really didn't have a role model to look up to in the same way as I had when we lived in Toronto. So it was very, very challenging for me to know how to manage those feelings and what to do with them. Who could I really talk to? Who could understand what I was going through? I remember being teased mercilessly by a Black boy who was in my class because I did look different from other Black girls. My hair wasn't straightened. It was short. It was different hairstyles that we tried, but I looked different, and that was picked up upon. And that was a real source of pain for me as I was, in that preteen stage and going into my teen years. We want to look like the people who surround us. We want to fit into these groups. We want to fit into our family. And when we don't, it's very difficult, because where do we fit exactly? What side do I stand on in the line, if you will? And that was very difficult. I remember being called an Oreo numerous times over the years, which essentially Black on the outside, white on the inside, like, oh, you're such a white girl, or being called, oh, you're a white girl. The way you talk is white. The way you dress is white. And that was difficult. I was very preppy, very much into my Gap, and I didn't look like a lot of the other Black girls that I saw around me. And that was a real challenge. In my social network, my social grouping at our church was predominantly white. And so again, I wasn't surrounded with people who resembled me. As I got a little bit older and that started to change and develop my peer groups, I felt more comfortable, but I went through a real period of feeling very, very uncomfortable around Black people. When I was in a room with all Black people, I would just be very timid and very shy, and very sort of, what do I do? What do I say? I didn't know how to act. And again, when I think back to that, teenage self, I'm sad for her. I was amongst my people and I didn't know what to do with myself because I wasn't confident in myself and I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. So this was a really, really challenging time of transition during my life. It was a huge challenge for me, and I literally felt like I was sort of in two worlds at all times. I also didn't fit into an all-white crowd. How could I? I wasn't white. I was raised by white people, but you look at me, I'm clearly not a white girl. So that was a real challenge. And who do I relate to more? Because in some ways I related to white crowd more because of things that I grew up with and experiences I had gone through, but I wasn't white. So I didn't have white privilege. I didn't have that cloak, over me. So it meant there were some very painful years, and I felt very misunderstood as well. Because when I did have racial incidents happen, as much as my mom was aware that they would happen to me and to my brother in a different way, I didn't always feel like I was being heard by my family. And when I would bring incidences of racialized incidents to them, they hadn't gone through it. So they didn't know that experience. So I didn't always know. I didn't learn to trust myself and my instincts when that was happening. And that was very, very difficult. So when did things start to change for me? Because I've gone down the negative, and a few little pops of light here and there. For me, exploring my identity started really, I would say the end of high school. I did start to sort of get into things around Haiti. I was more curious about it. But it was really when I went off to university. I moved back to the city, which I love, my big city life in Toronto, and I went to Ryerson University. Very diverse, very multicultural. And I found a niche. I found a group of Black students who I could just sort of slip into and be sort of a part of without them knowing my past. You see, my family didn't follow me to university, thankfully, and it was the first time in my life that I could be myself. What that meant, I wasn't fully sure, but I knew I didn't have that cloak that kind of came with me, that had traveled with me my whole life. So I got to set the rules now, and I was in charge. It was the first time in my life, I would say, I really truly felt in control, and I knew I could steer the ship. So I chose deliberately that I didn't tell a lot of people that I was adopted. I certainly didn't say I was transracially adopted. I just wanted to see if I could fit in with these other Black students. And I did. I really and truly did. People did not know. And for me, it might sound like, oh, but isn't that, horrible against your family? And it wasn't about that. It was so much bigger than that. It wasn't about me being ashamed of my family by any means. It was just about me needing to fit in and try to understand who I was as a Black young woman. I ended up, ironically, leading the Black Student Association at my university, and something I never thought in a million years I would be doing. I became comfortable to be in a room of all Black people. I loved it. I craved it. I craved more knowledge and information and insight about Black history, about Haitian history specifically, and it was extremely important that I was able to go on that journey and do that with a little bit of separation from my family. I took it a step farther, or 3,000 miles farther, by actually going abroad and going to live after university in the United Kingdom. Not your number one destination for multiculturalism per se, but I wanted a different experience. I wanted to travel and see the world. I was young, impulsive, no responsibilities, so I took off on this exciting adventure. What I found when I got there was actually a real opportunity to be on my own and to sit with myself and to sit with the loss and the grief that I had experienced for so many years that I didn't know what to do with, and I didn't know where to put it, and who could help me sort through these feelings of, growing up being told you should be so grateful. Oh, your parents are angels. They're going straight to heaven because they adopted you. And how dare you be upset? Don't be sad. You have an amazing life. If you'd stayed in Haiti, you'd be a prostitute, or you'd be a child slave, or you'd be this, you'd be that. All the negatives that I grew up with, I finally sat with them. And I took pause, and I cried, and I mourned. I had to grieve. I had to grieve those losses because I never had an opportunity to do so before. And my parents didn't realize that I needed to do that, and how important it was, how essential it was for me to develop myself as a whole person. I had to grieve the losses that I had experienced in my life. Remember, by the time I was just a few months old, I'd had 3 significant losses. My caregivers had changed 3 times by the time I was 4 months old. That's not a small feat. I needed to process that. That was essential for me to move forward. I also had an amazing opportunity to connect with adoptees, something I hadn't had when I was growing up in Canada. But connecting with other adoptees and transracial adoptees specifically was incredible. It was truly life-altering because I felt like, oh my goodness, I belong here. These people get me on a different way than anybody has ever gotten me before in my life. We didn't even have to speak all the time. We would just say something and we'd all nod in agreement like, yep, been there, experienced that. I know exactly what you're saying. It was the first time in my life I felt like this is where I really belong. I also had that wonderful experience when I went back to Haiti. I was excited and scared because I thought, what if my Haitian people don't accept me? I am this returnee to Haiti and I will be seen as a foreigner. Clearly, my accent, I don't speak French very well. My Creole was non-existent. I'm going back in as this foreigner. What if they don't embrace me? And that's something I craved, you see. I didn't have biological family to go and connect with. I was going on that journey when I went, but I knew I needed to feel like I belonged to Haiti as well. And I was so scared that that wouldn't happen. And I was so excited when it did. The people of Haiti embraced me so incredibly warmly. I felt loved. I felt surrounded. I felt accepted. All things that I needed to go through. So I've touched on a few of these already, but just to sort of delve a little bit deeper into them, I am mindful of time, but I just wanted to go through some of the processes that as adoptees, as we're developing our identity, what actually is this process like? It is the initial stage of processing our life. What has happened to us? All these decisions made for us our whole life. Questioning those decisions, questioning, why did you adopt me to your parents? Why did you choose me from Haiti? I asked those questions of my parents. Why Haiti? Why this country? Why are you going to South Africa? Why are you going here? Why are you doing a domestic adoption? Those questions need answers. And then we went on to mourning of our losses. And that won't always occur at the same stage or same process for everybody. And it will also look very different. Some people will go through extreme depression. Some people will go through, what I did, sort of getting it out through physical, crying. I also journaled a lot when I was in England. The first couple of years, it was very therapeutic for me. And also actually getting therapy as well. Getting specific therapy for adoption was also life-changing for me. And starting to realize, okay, I'm not alone, and these feelings are normal. These are natural feelings because I have suffered loss. I've gone through things that the majority of this world have not gone through. It's a very sort of selective and small group, really and truly. I already mentioned connecting with other adoptees and searching. And for me, searching was about going back and searching out Haiti as a country, the culture, the customs, what that meant to be Haitian, and also for biological family. And those were two things that were very important for me. And going on my journey, because of having no information whatsoever really to go on, I knew going back and searching for my birth family would be a very hard task. And it was. It proved to be very, very difficult indeed. But it was also important, and it was necessary that I did that. I needed to do that journey myself, and I needed to do that on my own. So I took my friend who actually did the film with me, but I didn't actually choose to take anybody from my family on that first journey. And that was just something that I needed to do for myself. And some people would vary. I have friends who did take their mothers, their families, their parents with them on that journey home, and they felt that was very, very important. So some of the other things that how transracial adoptees develop our identities is embracing that we're from these two different worlds, but we've been mushed together because of our experiences of being an adoptee and transracial adoptee, and meshing those worlds to a place where we feel comfortable in, and finding that place that says, you know what, I'm good right here. I don't have to necessarily fit into either side or either mold or choose a side. I can just be me, and whatever that looks like for me. Having children is also another time when you find a lot of adoptees then go back to search or to find out that medical information or that biological family, because they want to be able to pass something down to your children. And I was very, very aware of this when I was pregnant. I was very aware of attachment, wanting to ensure I had a close attachment and bond with my children. I was sort of hyper aware of it to the point that people are like, wow, your children are really attached to you, eh? And I'm like, yup, and I know why now when I'm sort of saying, mommy has to go out. I've done this, you know, but I was so sensitive to that. Because of my experiences, I sort of overdid it, you know, and I've touched on this a little bit of what I've gone through, the process that I've gone through. I've gone through all of these stages, and I wanted answers. I've wanted answers my whole entire life. Not knowing when you were born, the day of my birth, question mark, my whole life. I do not know to this day the day that I was born. And I over celebrate the day I was, the month. I now take it to a whole month. The whole month of October, I put up on, you know, on Facebook, accepting gifts and warm greetings all month of October long, because I could be born. I mean, they say it's probably within a few days, because I still have my umbilical cord attached, I believe, when I was taken to the hospital. So I was probably within, they guesstimate, 3 to 5 days, but still not knowing the exact day I was born, question mark, my whole life, one of many. I touched on the fact that I needed to mourn and how important that process was to me. And because I didn't have that permission when I was younger, it all compounded on me and actually was a big weight. And I know when I was younger and I went through periods when I was very distressed and distraught, and I didn't understand why all the time, and my parents didn't either. It's because I believe now that I was mourning and I was grieving, but I didn't have that outlet to do so in. So that was very difficult. I've touched on, I think, the rest of these. The other thing I would say is self-love. I had to learn to love this skin, you know, and that took a while. It really did. And it's still a journey. It's still a process. You know, as I sit here before you tonight, I'm still learning to love me. And that's extremely important, because as a foundling, especially, you can get a real sense of worthlessness. Like I was put in a ditch in the ground. You know, however way you turn that, even if my mother was doing that because that's the only option she had, it still doesn't make you feel much better about yourself. You still feel a sense of worthlessness, that I wasn't even taken to the hospital steps. As far as I know, I was left in a ditch. That does something to you, and it affects you deeply. And your children may very well have very similar stories, but being left like that will impact on them and will impact on you. So where do we go from here? I'm just skipping a little bit because I've touched on this in sort of a synopsis way, because I am mindful of time. But I do want to read out this quote before I go into what are some of the practical things that you can do for your own children. Excuse me. Alex Haley, the author of Roots and many other works of writing. I just love this saying. He says, in all of us, there is a hunger, marrow deep, to know our heritage, to know who we are and where we have come from. Without this enriching knowledge, there is a hollow yearning. No matter what our attainments in life, there is still a vacuum, an emptiness, and the most disquieting loneliness. When you just sit with that for a second, you think, this is my child. My child wants to know. And your child right now might not be saying, I want to know all of these answers. I want to have all this information. But be available to provide it to your child for when they are ready. And this is what I would say. How can you help your child going through this identity process? The emotional support you provide for your child is essential. That's sort of the base of all of this. Knowing that they can come to you with questions and curiosities about their birth family, knowing that you're going to be able to answer them and provide them with as much information as you can is very important. Knowing they can come to you and not feel like they're going to hurt your feelings. And often adoptees will say to me, the work I've done with Reunion and searching and as an intermediary, a lot of adoptees wait until their adoptive parents actually pass away before they will search. And that's sad, because that means their chances of actually finding their birth parents alive decreases massively. If you're waiting until you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s to start your search. And the message that they got is that I don't want to hurt my parents. My parents loved me. I love being a part of this family. I have a need to search, but I don't want to hurt the people who have raised me and loved on me. So ensuring that your children know that it may still be somewhat hurtful to you, and I acknowledge that, and I'm not ignoring that, but it's how you manage that and how you deal with that on your own. Setting the example and the information sharing to your children that, yes, you can come and talk to me. And I did that with my oldest daughter. You know, I always made sure she knew whenever she wanted to talk about her birth mother, I was there. I was happy to talk about her. Sometimes I would bring it to her more than she wanted, you know. I was very sensitive again to that need that she might want to talk about her birth mother. I need to make sure she knows this is a safe space to do so. I will never put her birth mother down. I will never talk negatively or degrade her. I will be as honest as I can. The things that aren't as nice, I will still be honest and truthful, but I will never disparage her. And that was very important message that I made sure she knew and she felt she could always come to me and talk to me about her. And I do believe it made a big difference because we've had some wonderful, opportunities to discuss things over the years. So you have to also, as I was saying, in this process, take care of yourself. So you need to be there emotionally for your child. To do that, take care. Self-care is key. So that means connecting with other adoptive parents, connecting with Adopt4Life, connecting with people like myself who you can bounce these ideas and these feelings off of, so you know you're being safe and you're being protected. Because there will be, I'm sure, times you need an outlet to sort of say, this is frustrating me, or I don't like that my child is doing this. I know they need this and they need to do this, so I need to be there for them, but you also need to offload to somebody else. I would say it's also very important that you've dealt with your own loss. As I mentioned earlier, that may be through a variety of means. And it's so, so essential that you've dealt with that and you've mourned your own losses before you adopt your child. And if you haven't had a chance to do that, and those of you who are parents already, take time to do that. Lean on your support networks to give you the space and time you need to mourn those losses, because that's so important so that you can be there open and full for your child. I'd also say that embracing the birth family is very important. Whether or not you have an fully open adoption, whether it's intercountry so you'll never see them, whatever way your adoption is formed, you need to embrace the birth family, whether it's through pictures, videos, country information. Get as much as you can and get those life books are so important. As I say, your child might not want to look at that at every moment of the day, because children have loads of other things they want to focus on and do, but always have it available. So when they're ready and they're able, they can go to that life book and sit down and talk to you and say, Mama, Daddy, I want to look at my birth family today. That's extremely important. So they know they're not a secret. It's not something shameful that they have to think, oh, I can't talk about being adopted. They know I can talk about this, and we can talk about this as a family unit. With intercountry, I would say as well, I want to just highlight the fact that the culture and the history and the social dynamics of the country, it's really important if you can pick up as much of those as possible. So people who are adopting intercountry, the family from, adopting from South Africa, soak up, you're going to be there for several weeks, soak up as much of South Africa as you can. There will never be enough time to get it all in, but get as many books, as much art, as much, as many South African artifacts and information and knowledge and history and insight into the country and the people that you can. Because as you're explaining your child's story and their circumstances, you'll be able to give them some more context around their circumstances. And they'll appreciate it, and they'll be able to be like, oh, my parents have an interest in where I'm from. And that's really cool, actually. So that's really important as well for children to know that you chose a country for a reason, and explaining that reason to them as well. Maybe you traveled there, maybe you fell in love with the country, you liked something specifically about it. Let them see your joy of their country, and make sure that it's very balanced. It's very easy, and I had this growing up, was that Haiti had a lot of negatives. They had the Duvalier rain, they had war, they had famine, they had hurricanes, all these natural disasters, poverty galore. I got dumped on really with all the negatives of Haiti that I was shocked. When I went to Haiti and I got off the plane and I was looking around and I thought, my God, this is beautiful. This is the Caribbean. This is palm trees and beaches and sand, and this is incredible. I hadn't had that image of Haiti in my mind, and that had a significant impact on me as well. So I just want to sort of tie up here because as I say, I'm mindful of the time, but what are some other practical ways you can develop that healthy identity for your child? Start at the beginning. Please don't wait till your child is 5 or 10 or until it's national whatever day, international day at your child's school. Incorporate your child's culture into your family. You are now a multiracial, multicultural family. When you adopt a child from a different ethnicity than yourselves, you have adopted the whole child. And that includes their ethnicity, their race, and everything that comes with them. So knowing that and incorporating that right from the beginning is key. It doesn't mean there won't be bumps in the road. It doesn't mean your child won't say to you at some point, oh my God, Mom, I don't want to do that today. Or I don't want to read about this. I don't want to hear about this. That will come because they're children at the end of the day. But it doesn't mean you give up. I had an adoptive father say to me once, well, we adopted 2 Chinese children and girls, and we took them to Chinese dance school once. They didn't like it, so we never went back. Do you give up that easily if your child takes piano lessons? Do you let your child go to 1 piano lesson and never go back and try it again? And I challenged that, and I said, really? And it was like, well, they didn't like it. They weren't comfortable. Is it that they weren't comfortable or you weren't comfortable? Your child will pick up on your cues, as I've said before, and I say it again and again because they are aware. You know, they say, what is it? Our verbal communication is one section, but our body language is a whole other kettle of fish. And we pick up on cues. Children pick up on cues. What else can you do? Normalize, normalize, normalize. Adoption, we see it now. You know, we see the media reports. We see the Sandra Bullocks of the world and the Madonnas and the Angelina and Brads. And it's becoming more popular to adopt, which has its own sort of issues. I'm not going to go into that today. However, there is some good that is coming out of this sort of in-your-face transracial adoption as we're seeing in the mass media, because your children are going to be able to relate more and say, hey, I know so-and-so adopted a baby, or I know that famous person adopted. And that does help because it gives them that connection. But how else can you do that? You can do that by connecting with other adoptive families, like through this organization here, and going to adoption camps. I think those are fantastic. I wish they had that opportunity when I was a child growing up. Connecting your children with other adoptees can be so powerful. And the younger you start it, the better it is for them. Because making those connections that are just, it's so special, it's so unique, that bond and that connection. And that family and your family will have a connection too, that again, not very many people in this world actually have to each other. So connecting with people like myself, older transracial adoptees, listening to our stories, our experiences, our words, what we've gone through in life. It's not all humdrum. We're not here to just dump on you or dump on your children. We truly are here because we want to help. We want to help your children to not have to go through all the pain and suffering that we did experience. So I say that in all honesty, it's so important to connect and listen to the voices of transracial adoptees. Culture and race is not just a one-day occasion. Make it a lifelong part of your family. I really can't stress it enough. How do you do that? You can do it through things like the babysitters you choose, the schools that you choose, which doctor do you go to. Let your children see role models and examples around them in their everyday life so they just feel at home and at peace. You may not live in the most multicultural neighborhood, although I strongly recommend you move to somewhere that is as multicultural as possible so your child will see themselves reflected on a daily basis. If that's not your reality, what other ways can you connect? What trips can you take? What families can you connect with? We have to remember, love does not conquer everything. Your children need to see themselves reflected. Just as I missed out on that for my first few years of life and the impact it had on me, I don't want your child, and I know you don't want your child to have to go through that either. We have to be very honest with ourselves. We don't live in a colorblind society. We simply don't. And people who come into the world with that mentality are doing more damage to their children than they even realize. You have to be aware of racism, of prejudice, of the viewpoints other people will have, and that you yourself may have, and that your wider family networks may have. You need to deal with those so that you can help your child in the best way possible. This is lifelong. This is not a sort of, we can do this for the first 5 to 7 years and then we're done. This is something you need to integrate into your child's life throughout their whole life. Can you do this fully? And I sort of end on this note, and it's not always the most comfortable place to end, but it's an important place to end. Their identity as a Black or person of color is very important. You as a non-Black or person of color cannot identify with them fully. Unfortunately, that is not how the world works. You will not be able to meet all of your children's needs. And I'm not saying this in a negative way at all. So please, please don't take it in that manner. I truly am saying this because we need to acknowledge that, be very honest with ourselves, and say, okay, I'm not going to be able to meet this part of my child's need. What can I do to fill that gap? I've already given some clear examples of things that you can do. Ask for help. You know, that is so, so important. Ask for help. There are people around you in your network, in your resources. If they aren't there, get those people in your life. Your child needs that. Your child needs you to talk about race. There's another film, a little clip I was going to show here, and I encourage you all to watch it. It's called Traffic Stop. The gentleman who's in it is Alex Lando. It's on YouTube. You can find it. Just type in Traffic Stop and it will come up. The synopsis of this is that his white mother, they grew up transracial adoption. They didn't talk about race. It was a colorblind mentality. What happened when he was stopped by the police and beaten to the point where he needed 45 stitches in his face? His mother had not prepared him for that experience. And his own mother is saying, I didn't do my job fully. I did not prepare my black son to get stopped because he was driving while black, even though his white friend was the one who had marijuana on him, not Alex. So these are the types of things that we have to be aware of. We can't be blinded by it. We have to acknowledge the white privilege that does exist. And I get that that's a hard word and people think, oh my goodness, but I don't want to feel guilty my whole life or feel like because of something my ancestors did. I'm not asking you to do that at all. What I'm saying is it's about acknowledging white privilege exists and then looking at it and turning it on its head and saying, okay, how can I stop that gap? What can I do to help white privilege in the position that I'm in to help people of color who aren't in that position of power or in that position of privilege? And it starts for you in your home because you need to be that gap for your children, and you can be that gap for your children, advocating for them in a variety of ways, showing them we're not going to stand for racism, like my mother and my best friend's mom did, marching down to that school as soon as a racist incident happened. My mother used her white privilege to help me, to be the voice where I didn't have a voice in that occurrence. And that, as I say, has stuck with me. That happened when I was 5 years old. I'm 38 years old. That's a long time to hold on to that memory. There's another clip here that is also excellent. Judith Craig talks about that white privilege, and it's a trip to the grocery store. Again, you can find it on YouTube. I really encourage you to please have a look at that. It's very short. These are very short clips I'm introducing, but it just gets home the point that actually, how can I use my white privilege to help my child and to teach them? I was going to do an activity based around that, but because we haven't watched the film, I would just encourage you, watch the film and take a second and just reflect on, okay, what are some things where I have privilege? I can name a few. Driving while black will not happen to you. Being stopped and searched, being followed in a store. These things have happened to me. I still get followed in stores to this day. I've had to teach my black children what we do and how we act in stores. We have to be aware. This is still happening. We do not live in a colorblind society. We live in a society that sees color, and that's okay. Difference is okay. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but we've got to teach our children how to manage it and how to know that they will be judged, how they will be treated, and what they can do to stand up for themselves, be respectful, but not take it lying down. I encourage you all to read another article, White Privilege, Color and Crime, a personal account from Peggy McIntosh. And she writes about her white privilege in such an open and honest way. I really appreciated reading that. And I think it will bring home, and she highlights so many of the areas where she has this privilege. And then she talks about what has she done to bridge the gap for people, and how has she done it? And I just think it's an excellent read because it's not from my perspective as a Black adoptee, it's from her perspective as a white woman. So again, I encourage you to read that. I will be sending out some resources for you, so you can have a list of these resources. I'll make sure I do that, so you do have access to all of these resources that I've mentioned. So just in closing, really, because I do want to have a few minutes for questions, I just want to remind you that this is a lifelong journey. I'm still on my journey to this day. I've come to a place where I did my DNA testing about 2 years ago, or 2 years ago, I signed up for Ancestry.com first. And I made some matches. Very exciting for me. I finally had some answers as to what made me up. So I'm part Ghanaian, part Cameroonian, Togo, Benin. I'm 1% Italian and Greek as well. Who knew? I didn't know. Now I know. But it was so important to know what my makeup was and what made me who I was. So the DNA, I am a fan. And I know not everybody is, but I think it is an incredible way for technology. For me, what it also did was connect me finally to my birth family. So it was 10 years to the month that I traveled all the way to Haiti to find that my biological paternal family was living in my backyard. So I have now been able to connect with initially a first cousin and now my siblings on my paternal side. I have 7 siblings. I have nieces and nephews, aunties and uncles, and I've been able to connect with them because of DNA testing. Sorry, it's still something I just had happened in October, and it's incredible. It is something I've craved and longed for my whole life, and I've been very blessed because they've embraced me and welcomed me into the family in such a warm and loving manner. I was able to meet with some of them over the Christmas holidays, and it was incredible for the first time in my life, outside of my children, to see people who I looked like. I resemble some of my siblings very strongly, and that was very powerful for me. It was very powerful. And having the support and love of my family was also equally important to me, to know that they were supporting my trip to go and visit my birth family. They were sharing me at Christmas, and that's going to keep happening now. I'm going to have to share my time and split my time. But I knew that I was going and doing that with the love and support of my family, and that made a significant difference for me. So pick up the cues, please, from your children. Listen to the nonverbal and the verbal cues. Allow them to grieve, support them through the process, find the right support for them and for you. Self-care and care of your children and your family is so extremely important. Thank you so much for your time, and I appreciate, I've warbled on long enough, so I want to take a pause here. It looks like we do have a few questions that are coming in, and hopefully I can take a few minutes to answer some of your questions. Thank you.
Wow. So I know that's a lot. That's very powerful. And for those of you who are listening and just absorbing it in, this feeling that you must be feeling is exactly how I felt in watching the documentary. So again, please. So we do have a couple of questions and comments. So someone was just commenting that thank you so much about sharing your views and experience on the DNA testing. Is that was really helpful for them.
Okay.
And we do have another a question. So thank you very much for your presentation. My wife and I are white and our daughter is Black. We would like to find out ways to introduce more people of color. Racial mirrors is kind of an expression that I've heard into her life and into ours as well. Do you have any advice or suggestions on good ways to do that if our social circles are mostly white?
Yeah, definitely. I don't know where this person lives. I don't know if you're in a more white neighborhood, but trying to just even traveling down to a major city near you, whether it's Toronto or Ottawa or Montreal, wherever you're sort of based around. Larger cities are great because there's a lot of different ethnic groups that have cultural centers. There's churches, there's, other places of worship that you can go to start to seek out some of these, groups and friendship groups that you want to create in a natural way as possible. It's always, of course, a little awkward when you're trying to make new friends and new relationships, but some of those things will really help. When there's cultural days that maybe reflect your child's cultural background, go to some of those. You may be the fish out of water, and that's okay. I think it's important actually for parents to sort of experience the flip side of what your children are going through, especially as you say, if your social network is very white. Books are great. Again, I'll provide some resources on some of the great books that I've even got for my own children, just to see herself reflected. Heroines are important. Films that you show her. So there's a lot more characters, like I don't know her age, but like Adopt McStuffins, my girls have been into that. So it's like a little, it's a Disney show that's a little Black, she's a toy doctor, but the fact that she's a Black girl and she's a doctor, love it. That's fantastic. For older children, I've heard that the Black Panther movie is amazing. And people are really finding that a very powerful tool that they are connecting with. So there's definitely more now than there would be sort of in the 70s and 80s that you can plug into and connect with. So it's just about taking yourself, I would say, a little bit more out of your comfort zone. As I say, babysitters, that's a great way. Somebody they can relate to, they can have fun with. role models, whether it's a doctor, a dentist, you know, just expand your network as much as you can to incorporate that for your daughter. Because they do need to see those role models and also create those friendships for themselves. There are adoption camps. I don't know if there's one here in Canada. I heard that there was one. I'm not familiar with it myself, but I know of several in the States that happens. I don't know if you're in a position to do something like that, but even traveling to something of that nature would be wonderful for your daughter, and also create relationships for yourselves as well. But yeah, definitely try and reach out to some of those organizations. If you want to send me a private message and let me know what area you're in, I can happily explore some more of that for you as well.
Wonderful. And I think the rest of the comments are just talking about how powerful this presentation was and just thanking you, which is my sentiments. Absolutely. So if I'm just being mindful of time, and I don't want to, mindful of your time as well, Judith. So I'm just going to see if there's any last minute questions. I don't see any kind. I think it's a lot to process, and I think it's amazing. Oh, perfect. I was going to say, if there's a way for people to contact you, you're ahead of that. So perfect.
Yeah, definitely. No, I'm very happy. You can visit my website, which is just my name, judithcraigmorency.com, and that will kind of fill you in on what I have coming up. I'm also going to be starting in the spring sort of like an adoption coaching program. So I'd be happy to fill people in individually more about that opportunity. So if you're interested in that, please just send me an email. In the subject line, just put adoption coaching so I don't miss you. And I'll be happy to sort of fill you in on when that's going to start and the process for that. Also, I know you. There was some query about the film, my own film, Adopt4Life. It can be purchased. It's on Studio. I even struggle to pronounce this, Infancy TV. So again, I'll send all these links to Catherine to send out to you folks, so you can have that. I am speaking as well, just to mention, in case anybody's in the Toronto area. Well, actually, I have 2 events coming up both in April, actually. So those in the Ottawa area, my film will be screening in Ottawa. And I'm happy to provide you with more information about that. It's with a group of adoption practitioners, but they've opened it up to the public. So it'd be great to see anybody in the Ottawa area come out. It's on a Monday afternoon. So it's Monday, April the 9th, and that is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So if you're able to skive off work a little bit early or take an extended lunch break, I'd love to see you and meet you in person. And then following that, the following weekend, actually, I'll be at an event here in Toronto called Women on Fire, which is really close to my heart because the organization supports Haiti, which, of course, is something I've loved doing and supporting over these past many years. And I'll be speaking at the gala event there. So if you're in the Toronto area, I'd love to, again, have an opportunity to meet you in person and you come out and hear. I'll be sharing a bit more about my experience and my story. So I'd love to see you there. But yes, please do visit. Oops, sorry about that. Please do visit my website for more information, and you can email me at jcraigmorency@gmail.com.
Perfect. And so I see there's some people who are starting to log off, but we do have one last question. I think it might be a good way to actually wrap up the webinar as well. So someone has asked if you could please just repeat one more time how crucial it is for exposure to similar cultural role models.
Yeah, I really can't stress it enough. I think I just draw it back to the fact that what I lacked during my early years, and you know, it wasn't a fault of my parents in the sense of I'm not like yelling at them and saying, oh, how dare you do that. It was the circumstances we were in. My thing is now in 2018, we really don't have any excuses, folks. You know, and I'm not saying that to be callous, but we've got to do better because trust me, I would have been a lot farther along in my journey and gone down a different path. One, I believe, less painful if I'd had some more of that. Having role models, having people in your children's life. It has to be normal, though. Forcing a person to come in and, oh, hi, I'm here to, you know, no. Make it be natural as possible. I'm also a big supporter of mentorship programs, however, and that's something I am looking to start in the near future because I do believe that having that, you know, like big brother, big sister kind of a mentorship is also really important for transracial adoptees, young ones to connect with older ones who've lived those experiences. So stay tuned for that. That is something I really want to introduce hopefully later on in this year. But find the way to connect. Please, if you're not sure, please ask me. Send me an email. I will be more than happy to make some specific suggestions, as I say, for the areas that you're living in. But seek out them out. Go to the library, chapters online. You can order books. You know, you can order videos. Look for very specific, you know, whether it's cartoons that are child-friendly, also films and stories about adoption. I also think that's very important. But be mindful and pre-screen these things, because sometimes it can be a little too traumatizing or triggering for your child. So just be aware of that, but try and get as much role modeling in your child's life. And also just visually, you know, you want your child to look around your home and feel like this is our home. So reflect your child's culture in your home. It doesn't mean you're appropriating culture by having, you know, paintings up on your walls and things like that. Do it in a respectful manner and ask people of the culture and backgrounds. There's embassies of, I think, probably most countries in the world here in Canada that you can access. So even calling an embassy, calling a cultural center, calling a place of worship, generally these organizations, these places will be more than happy to provide you with some support, at least on some level. You're not alone on this journey. Please know that and reach out, because we are here to support you. So thank you again so much, everyone, for your time. I've really appreciated having the opportunity to speak with you this evening, and I look forward to working with you all very soon. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. And thank you, Judith. We really appreciate it. Have a good night, everybody. Bye.